In ministry, you're used to taking a lot of meetings with staff or with people. The trick, though, however, can be what do you do with your elder or leadership meetings? Since those are a little bit different, how can you structure them and how do you make them effective? And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 7 tips for effective eldership meetings.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. Today we're going to be giving you 7 tips for running an elder or leadership team meeting.
This is a question I get a lot, especially for young church planters who have elder or a leadership board and they are wanting to know how do you run through it. And so we're going to share some things that we do to help you on your journey. Real quick, just personal thing to share about the podcast. We have our first sponsor. If you're interested in sponsoring the Church Planting Podcast or Practical Church Planting Podcast, you can let us know. This just helps us cover some of the costs for the podcast, for the courses, for our website, the Facebook group, everything we run. So this is just a way for us to help cover some of those expenses.
Yes.
And so this month's sponsor is Faith Street. If your community is scattered, if you're feeling worn out and frayed, if you're wondering what church looks like in 2020 and beyond, which because of the pandemic, many of us are, Faith Street is here to help. If you're wondering about what Faith Street is, it is a new kind of mobile app for churches focused on discipleship and community. It's not just communication, so it's not just your stereotypical church app. It's a little bit different. They strengthen people's commitment to the church and each other, and it builds community by prompting prayer, generosity, reflection, fellowship, and teaching as daily practices. And so Faith Street is led by a team with roots in the Assemblies of God, Vineyard, PCA, Anglican, and non-denominational worlds, and it's built by leaders for leaders. So if you are interested in learning more about Faith Street, you can go to faithstreet.com/practical. And the good news is Practical Church Planting listeners can receive 20% off your order if you work with them. That's faithstreet.com/practical, and they can answer any questions that you have. So again, today's episode, tips for running an eldership meeting. What do you do? I totally understand what that was like. We planted when I was 26, about to turn 27. Very fortunate to have elders that were older and wiser and have experience, which I know is not everybody's story. And there was a lot of intimidation for me of like, how do I actually do this well? And what does it actually look like? And so here are some things that we've done that I would share to you. To be clear, this is not like a staff team, though.
Right.
So this isn't like people that you see every week or you meet with every week. This is an eldership team, or if you have some sort of leadership structure, maybe you meet once a month or maybe twice a month. These are people that aren't typically in the day-to-day operations of the church, or at least some of them are, or at least most of them probably are not. And so how do you lead them, and how do you have meetings with them that are productive if you're not quite sure what to do? So here we go. Number 1, to send updates in your agenda ahead of time. Something we've always done that's been very helpful. That's what everyone's said. But typically what I'll do is, it depends on we've changed. When we started New City, we had a management team. We met once a month over Zoom. Now we have an elder team. There's 4 of us, me, Brian, and two other guys, and we meet once a month on Tuesday morning over Zoom, and once a month on Monday night in person. So the second Tuesday in the morning, the fourth Monday in the afternoon. What I'll do at least a day ahead of time is I'll send out the agenda, and so the first thing will be updates, so just some big level items that not everyone might not know about, some things that I'm thinking, some things that are happening in the church. You know, it could be anywhere from 5 to 10, I don't know, just big level things. And then under that is the agenda. Here's exactly what we're going to talk about. Sometimes I'll even put like how many minutes. Not that it has to be rigid, but especially if there's a lot to go over to hopefully keep us moving. The benefit of this is that it can save some time when you're actually meeting, because especially if there's some things you want them to think about ahead of time. Some people like need time to think and process, not just on the spot, or they might want to have some ideas. And so letting them know ahead of time some big ideas is helpful. Letting them know the agenda allows them to be prepared. And so if you want them to be prepared, that's what you want to do. And so again, it's just an email. I'll send out 24 hours in advance, typically, of here, 5 to 12 things happening in the church, and here are our agenda items of things that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if you want your team involved, then they need to know what you're talking about ahead of time. You know, in other words, these aren't meetings that are just you, pastor, give updates to the church to everyone else and, disseminating information and then we're done. Like the whole point is to be a discussion and to hopefully get some guidance where needed and things like that. And so people just need time to prepare. And so having that agenda ahead of time has been super helpful for us because, like, for example, once a month we talk about financials, the previous month and year-to-date, things like that, where that is just kind of a standard thing we talk about every month. We know it's coming in which day, but everything else is pretty up in the air. Like there's nothing else that's really like set in stone. This we're going to address every single time, because just needs of the church change and things change. And so not knowing what it is, I think is if you go into it with your team not knowing what you're going to talk about, you're going to get a lot of nods, I think, and a lot of just saying okay, and probably a lot of let's talk about this next time because we need time to think about it. And so you can kind of avoid that by sending it out ahead of time.
Yeah, and it really helps, especially, typically you have elders or leaders who are obviously in the marketplace, the business world, and it just gives credibility to you that you take this seriously and it's not something you're just throwing together, because especially if they're successful in the workplace, which you don't have to have, your elders do not all need to be successful, but some of them might be, and they might have some wisdom to share that could be really helpful. They're used to people like having things organized, and they're probably on top of it themselves. So this, you don't have to be perfect about it, but you do need to have some sort of, hey, I'm trying here to be helpful. Now, I would say, just as a side tip, I used to do this where like the day before I would just try to think of everything, especially for the agenda, what we're going to talk about. Like, what do I want to talk about? What I've done now is I just, on my to-doist, the to-do list thing we've talked about other episodes. Anyway, I have a section for elders, and so if there's something that an elder asks or wants to talk about, I'll just take a note of it. So when I'm sending out the agenda, I'm not trying to think off the top of my head, what are we talking about? Or if there was something we need to follow up with from the previous meeting, I'll just make a note of it. So I always know, here are the items. I'm not trying to think of the day before, what should we talk about?
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point about you taking it seriously, because for the majority of the time, your elders or management team aren't going to be staff, or at least majority, not staff. And so they're volunteering their time, and to show up to something, especially if you do some in person, but even over Zoom, and to seem unprepared, it's kind of shows them that, like, I mean, honestly, not that they would say this out loud, but why should I invest my time in something that you as the leader don't seem to be investing your time in? And so I think it just puts a bad taste in people's mouth if you come unprepared, especially for people, especially if you're a younger church planner like we're talking about, and have people on your team that are older than you, which you should. Then coming unprepared just kind of reinforces that, I don't know, the fact that you're unprepared and aren't taking it as seriously.
And this isn't always the case, but if you're a younger church planter and you have some older, people on your eldership team, they might have more kids or older kids. They've been working full-time jobs for a long time. Like they might be in a season of life potentially where there's just a lot going on. Yeah. And they have to still work their full job and do this on top of it. And so it's different than a staff meeting, for example, where people are here and they're expected to be here, and this is kind of their job. This is 100% volunteer hours for them, and so you really want to make sure it's worth their time if you want them to stick around for the long term. Because if they feel like, this is a lot for me to take a night out. It might just be once a month for you, but on top of other responsibilities that they have going on, that's another thing that they have to do. I just appreciate Larry Osborne in one of his books. He writes a lot of good books, Sticky Church, Sticky Teams. I think it is Sticky Teams. He talks about eldership stuff, and we do a lot of the stuff that he says. But he just talks about how, for people that are on church staff, it's easy to forget what life is like for a normal person. So a lot of times if you have an event or something, the church staff member might be like, well, since I'm working until 9 o'clock on Friday, well, let's say Thursday, I don't know, I'm going to come in later and which is totally fine. But we forget that everybody else that's coming to these things can't do that. Yeah. And that this is a significant thing for them. And so sending updates and agenda ahead of time, you'll get better at as you do it. It's not like it has to be some formal thing, but I would let them know what's coming up, let them know what you want them to be thinking about, and not just say, hey, we'll just talk about it in person. It just gives you more time, especially because these meetings are more infrequent, so you want people to have feedback.
Yeah, that's good.
Number 2, start and end on time. This is a big one. This is just important just in general. Yeah. And I know it's kind of like we get it, but like this is, again, because you have people who are 100% volunteering their time, especially if they're used to having good structure. Unfortunately, in some churches, like productivity and focus is not a strong suit at times. And so we can kind of not be kind of what people typically expect business, meetings to run. Yeah. And I'm not saying church is a business, so yeah. But anyway, this is the way to be respectful. That I'm not showing up late. I'm not showing up a minute late. I'm not showing up 3 minutes late. I'm always on time, if not a little bit early. And we're going to end on time. The benefit of that too is, you probably have a good relationship with the people on your elder team, leadership team. It can be very easy to just hang out the whole time. Yeah. And if you want to do that, you should schedule some time for that, so it's in there. But if people know, hey, we're starting on time, they'll show up, and we're ending on time, you'll stay on track of what you're doing. I think it's completely okay to say, hey, like for us on our monthly meeting in person, it's from 6 to 8:15. And I'm done at 8:15.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if people are still talking and hanging out, that's totally fine. It's not like you want people to leave, but we're going to stop talking about the agenda items. Sometimes we don't talk about all of them. I'm learning to not put as much things on there, especially in person, because there's more time to just get off track, which is fine. But you've got to be done on time. And if you don't get to it, some of your stuff you want to talk about, you just don't get to it, and you just got to plan better for the next time.
Yeah, this kind of, it goes hand in hand with the previous point, because if you don't have an agenda of what you're doing, then it's going to be so easy to all of a sudden your time that you allotted for this is just about up, and there are things that you wanted to get to that you didn't, and so that'll cause you to run late. But I totally agree. I mean, I've sat in meetings, like not just church meetings, but in general, and any meeting that goes longer than people expect it to is a drag. Like, people hate it. It's a drag. Honestly, like you expect something to be a certain amount of time, and even if that certain amount of time is a long period of time, you expect to be done by then. And so having an end time that's a concrete end time, and not going on further, it helps people know that they can trust what you say, what these meetings are going to be. They can plan their families accordingly. Especially on a Tuesday morning ones that are over Zoom, we have an end time, and it's in the morning. It's at 7:30, and so people have work to get to. I mean, the two of us work here, but the others don't. And so if we just say we're just going to keep going, well, that's really a problem, because that cuts into work time. That might cut into kids' time before work, whatever. And so I know it just comes down to being respectful. Be respectful of time.
And it might be helpful, if you send out this agenda ahead of time, to start and stop in that time, is to have like kind of minute markers of how long you want to talk about this thing. And it's okay if you hit less, but if you hit more, it's going to, you're going to have to cut something out or just help people focus more. Because some things, it's like once you talk about it, you're done. Even if the decision isn't made, like everyone's shared what they've got to share, maybe you have to go do some work after the fact. And so it's easy to say, hey, we're going to stop talking about this. And if you come in under, that's great, but it just helps people stay focused. If you feel like you have a lot, here's the agenda, here's how much time it is. Again, if you start on time and you end on time, you know exactly how much time you have. Yeah. So that's a big one. It might seem like we get it, but it's even more, I mean, I think it's just important and respectful in general, but it's even more important for an elder or leader me that it's not as frequent, and you have people who are giving their time. So that's the second one. The third one, this is something that you might not think about, that I guess we've always done it. We've added things to it. It's just been really, really helpful. Again, especially for people who are non-staff, who aren't in the details every day, and that is to share trackable metrics. Now, we're not just talking about financials. So once a month, on our Zoom one, we talk about financials. Our in-person one, we don't, just because it's boring, and you want to do better stuff with that. Yeah. Sticky Teams by Larry Osborne. He talked about this, but anyway. So of course there's profit and loss sheets, budget, like that's obviously trackable. But there should be other metrics that are easy to read quickly that help you know where they are. And if you do this, we're 4 years in, we've got a lot of data on stuff. And so we have what we call our data tracking sheet. It's a Google sheet with a bunch of tabs on it. You can tell me what I'm missing, Brian. We have giving, both our total giving and just our local giving, because as a church plant, you have some people that give outside New City. We have Facebook likes and follows, just like each month. We have attendance, obviously. We have Connect cards on there. We have Facebook and YouTube views, which of course people are like, what do those mean? But we've at least started tracking them how we want to track them, so we can just see based on those numbers, whatever they mean, are they going up or down? Right. What else is on there? Off the top of your head, I can't remember.
Total number of donors. So
each month.
Yeah, so you can see not just is your money going up or down, your donations, but the amount of people that are giving. There's others. What is this? What is
well, I mean, when we did the building fund, we had a sheet on there. Yeah, I can't remember everything.
We do break down our attendance for like who's in the auditorium, who's in kids. So we're tracking how many kids we have too. Well, those are the major ones. At least.
I should have looked at this before we started. But anyway, there are things that's not just money and attendance that they can look at and see how we're doing. It's really helpful for giving trends and attendance trends. Like traditionally on this year, is it go up or down, so you don't have to freak out as much. COVID's like ruined the last year of our data, because who knows what any of it means anymore. But at least it's helpful to know, because now we started meeting back in June, which is a couple months from now. And so it's like, okay, what's this post-COVID world? We have data. And so share trackable metrics every time. Well, all of the metrics are updated monthly, and so it's for our first meeting. But I'll just re-put the Google link in there for people to see, and it's just quick information for them to have.
Yeah, and it helps to share things. Like I think it's easy to go one of two ways. You can either over track. You can, well, I mean, everybody under tracks things, like doesn't track as much as they should.
Yeah.
But you can go too far and track more than you really need to and just get down in the weeds too much. Like, so nothing that we track, we don't track anything that doesn't change month to month. You know, so like in our context where we are, we do baptisms as much as we can, but it's not necessarily something we do every month. So like that's an important thing, obviously, but it doesn't make sense for us to track it every month, and that's just extra data.
To be clear, we track it just not on the data tracking thing, because it's
So it's not something that we need to have a discussion about every single month, because we know when we've had things like that. And so figure out, and this is probably a good conversation to have with your elder team of what they think is the most important things, and track them. You know, whether that's you yourself or if you have someone else that does it, but I like
website views. That's another one.
Website views. Yep. Like I think I'm a firm believer that things will not grow if you don't track their growth. Like they won't grow on purpose. At least they may grow accidentally, but you need to know. You're not going to know when things are trending downwards until it's too late if you're not tracking things. And so having a good sense of where things are going up and down really helps.
Yep. So that, I mean, and we even have, I'm trying to think, I can't remember. There's even stuff that we've tracked and then stopped tracking because we realized like there's no point in doing this. So whatever it is, again, it's one of those things that I would just start today, and you can add stuff to the list as you go on. It's always better to have too much data and then stop it than saying, I wish we had done these things. So if you're even somewhat like, this might be interesting to know, then do it. I mean, there could be like, depending on, this is, I don't know, like how many parking spots are used each week? Like, do you not have a lot of parking spots? How big is your church? I mean, you could track how many cars are in a spot. Like, whatever you think might be helpful for you and what you're trying to do, just start tracking it and change it as you go.
Yep.
So share trackable metrics, not just financial stuff is good. And so here's tip number 4. Don't ask for decisions on non-relevant things or items. It's okay to ask for input, but you don't want to get into the weeds on every small thing. I think all of us know or maybe have heard, you have pastors who have like their elders are making decisions on everything and they feel so restrictive, and you're wasting all this time talking about stuff that doesn't really matter, like this $5 expense here. And it's like, this stuff isn't important. It doesn't matter. It's not really relevant to what you need as like an elder team, which is kind of more high level, direction, accountability. I would say part of the problem I think that happens to pastors is because, especially if you're younger, and we've talked about this on other episodes, you kind of maybe lack a humble confidence, and you feel like you need people to tell you what you should or shouldn't do because you're afraid to make a decision and to make a wrong one. Yeah. And so there are things that you shouldn't talk about with the elder team. So let me give you an example. And this might be right or wrong. It's just how we do it here. So, we are doing 2 services for Easter, which is as a recording that's coming up. And then we decided maybe not to do 2 services just because of COVID stuff. That was not a decision we talked about with the elders. That was totally just staff, because staff is on the day-to-day. We knew kind of all that goes into it. We don't get their feedback on stuff to do with the wall, or what's to do with our space. If it's an expensive item, so for example, for us, there's something we want to do with one of our walls and lobbies going to cost like $1,000. And so we talked about it. We spent some time discussing it because with COVID and financial stuff, it's just tight right now. But in the future, that might $1,000 outside of the budget purchase might not necessarily be an elder thing. And so you got to be really careful of what you want to discuss and what you don't want to discuss. It's okay to get input, but don't set this expectation or this precedent that they make decisions on everything, because honestly, they probably don't want to do it. There's other things you want to talk about. And if that's what you've always done, when you get to the place where you want to stop doing that, it will be hard to not do it.
And there's things you can get input on that don't need to be meeting agendas. Like you can talk to people outside and just say, hey, this is something we're doing, or what. I don't have a specific example, but like to get your input on it. And if it can be something that can be summed up in a quick email, like we don't need to necessarily always carve time out of a meeting for every question. And that's why just a good flow of communication helps. And I think, especially if you're doing what we said previously about sharing trackable metrics, especially if you're sharing, or if you're talking about financial things every month, then there's not really a need to ask about every single specific financial question you have. Honestly, you shouldn't have as many financial questions, because if you're looking at the budget every month with the team, not just by yourself, but with the team, then you know what fits into the budget and what doesn't. If you go long stretches of time without ever looking at it or without discussing it, then there's going to be questions of, can we afford this and can we not? And having to go to someone and say, let's talk about if we can afford this thing. But if I know, just a few weeks ago, we just talked about where the budget was at, I kind of know if we can afford it or not. And I mean, granted, outside of like huge, budget altering things, but like if it's not in the budget, I know it's not in the budget. And if it is, then, if it's in the budget, then you never need to have a discussion, because that's why you have a budget. But it kind of, all these things are really like stacking on top of each other. Do these things, and then you don't have to ask all these questions and to show up with a big list of questions saying, you guys are wiser than me. Please guide me on how to do every single thing. But it's just we have some high level things to talk about and not necessarily having to get in the weeds of every single decision.
And I think if you do like you said an agenda ahead of time, this can help you.
Yeah.
Because if you're like, here's what we're going to talk about, and as you're like maybe typing out this email, you might think, well, is this worth it? Like, is this worth talking about?
True.
Because again, if you ask for decisions on everything, it's a waste of time, and you're not going to want to do that long term. And so, but it can create these habits that you want to break. And so find, what are the things that you want to talk about with your elders? What do you want them to give input on? Typically, it's more high level accountability, vision, direction. And a lot of the small things just don't need to be discussed. And so don't feel like you have to ask them for everything. They're not thinking that, but if you do that, then it's just going to become a thing where I guess every small decision we make, where to put the flags outside. And, it's okay to ask for input, but I would even say don't even ask for input on some of those things because you can open yourself up to now we're making a decision about it when, it's just not worth. That's not the space for it.
Yeah, like for example, on our elder team, one of them was a pastor before, like an executive pastor before, and so he obviously has a lot of or could have a lot of input on things we do and has a lot more experience than we do. But if we went to him on every single thing, then it becomes like it almost becomes we need to get his permission for everything. And not that he would think that, but I think it would really show him that we aren't willing to make decisions on our own and that we almost have to like get permission from him to do anything because he has more experience. Where there's things we should go to him for to use his experience, but not on every single decision, like you're saying. Yeah. And that might mean at the end of the day, you end up making some wrong decisions, and that's totally okay. Like that's just that's part of leadership is making wrong decisions and learning from them. Yeah,
and it's important to remember too. Like I really mean this. Like most of the time, there's a lot of things they just don't really care about or think about. They've got their other jobs. Like they don't even care about what you decide on. What's your first time guest gift or what kind of coffee that you have. Like they don't care.
Yeah. It is funny talking about this guy specifically who was a pastor. I'm trying to think of what exactly was brought up, but there's been times where things have been brought up to him, and he'll pretty much say like, "Do you want me to give you all the information I have on this? Because I have like 20, 30 years of whatever of like experience on it. Like, do you really want that, or do we just need to kind of move on from this?" Yeah. And I think having someone that has that kind of awareness is helpful because you really don't necessarily always want all that information on something like that.
Yep. So don't ask for decisions on non-relevant things and items. Just stick to what you think is most important. Number 5, do them on a consistent schedule. So have your meetings at the same time every month. I mean, there are times where you might have to move them, but it needs to be like, here's just what we do it.
Yeah.
And send calendar invites. Don't assume just because you know that it's on there. If there's not a calendar invite that has everybody on there, people just forget. For us, it's changed over the years, but for us, again, second Tuesday morning, we Zoom. The fourth Monday night, we meet in person. Things can sometimes change, like the in-person meeting sometimes has to change. Yeah. But that's just generally speaking, it's what it is, and it's understood, but there's also a calendar invite. Sometimes there's not one that's sent, and so people ask me, like, are we still meeting? So make sure, I would recommend sending a calendar invite so everybody knows.
Yep.
But do them on a consistent schedule. Don't just change them all the time. And it is okay if this means that someone you might want on your elder team can't be on it. Because you just can't be in a place where you're always not sure, especially if you have more than 2 people, where you're always having to go around this one person. You might have someone who's really great, really awesome, and they're just not in a season where they can do that. I would tell you, as great as it would be to have them, it's not worth not knowing when you're meeting consistently because it's just not fair to everybody else.
And that's a good point. It's potentially a season. Like you have elders or leadership team for forever, for the life of the church. And so, and that doesn't mean every elder isn't going to be on it for the life of the church. So just because it's not a good season for someone now, it doesn't mean they can't be utilized in the future. But I think not having a consistent schedule that would probably be the number one reason if I was approached for me to say no. Like, because I have a family, I got other responsibilities. Like, if I don't know when it is, I can't be waiting until like the week of to see what else I can schedule in my week. If we want to get together with another family or something like that, and I can't actually commit to something until week of because I'm not sure when this other meeting is going to take place, that's just not something that's sustainable. And so every month, same time, seems like a no-brainer to me. But I know that it's not for a lot of people. So make sure it's consistent. Have it same time every month.
Yep, make sure it's consistent. And again, this might dictate who's on it.
And that's totally okay.
But yeah, it's important. Number 6, share names and specific situations. So if they're elders or if you have a leadership team, manager team, whatever, hopefully they're trustworthy.
Yes.
And so there can be, obviously there's a tendency to not always be able to share names and specific things that are going on with maybe all the staff or whatever for good reasons. But if they're your elders, then you should be able to talk about it, discuss about it.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't have to be like, well, there's this one person, and not be able to give. I mean, because they care, they want to be able to pray. What's really helpful is having a membership process or a partnership, what we call it. Pretty much, if someone's a partner at New City and there's an issue, I feel 100% comfortable to always tell the elders because they've said, this is my church. So they said that they want to walk alongside of us. Even if they don't, I mean, if they were to tell me don't tell anybody, then maybe, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't. But if there's an issue and they don't, I mean, and we just talk about it, I don't have to tell the elders, obviously, but I don't feel bad in any way letting the elders just know what's going on here because they have high character. They want to know what's going on in the church. They want to pray. And you should have people to talk about it with. And it can't just always be someone outside the church.
Yeah.
You need to have people that are involved, and they need to know what's going on. They need to know where the needs are. And so you should share names in specific situations with your elders.
Yeah, this is why it really helps to have a pretty in-depth elder process. Have we done an episode on our elder process? Have we not?
I don't think so.
Look back. Maybe we should.
Yeah.
But in other words, it's not just, in our case, it's not just, like you said, the most successful people are on it or the people that seem like they'd be the biggest asset of like church experience or things like that. But there's a process to go through. And part of that is kind of deciphering how trustworthy, or that this person is trustworthy and can be kind of privy to information that the rest of the church can't be. And I think if you don't have that, it's going to be really tough to call these people elders. Like it's gonna be easy for them to make business decisions, but it's gonna be tough for them to help lead the church. If they don't know what's going on. And on the flip side, like they need to be able to share it as well. It's not just you need to be able to share it, but also if they're doing things like leading community groups or having discussions with people, they need a place to share it too. Because I mean, honestly, there's a lot of things that come up where there's really no other place there they can share it other than there. Yeah. And sometimes, especially if don't have church experience, they may not necessarily always know how to walk through an issue with somebody or something like that, especially if they don't have all this experience. And so it just has to be a trustworthy place. But that also has to be a conversation you have with people ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Like you can't just drop something major that's going on with somebody and them thinking for all this time all we've ever talked about is budget things. And now I didn't know we were going to be talking about something this heavy. Like this needs to be the expectation. This is what elders are. This is what we talk about. And if you're not okay with it, like if that's not information you're comfortable with, then this isn't for you. Yep. And that's okay. But yeah, that should be something you know about ahead of time, but also you need to be comfortable sharing things.
Yeah. And I know you might be like, should I share with people what someone said to me? You got to do what you think is right. Mm-hmm. I haven't had anyone be upset with me yet. Honestly, they typically, if they're partners at New City, they've said that this is where they want to do life. Typically they actually are, it's like they like that other people that they trust can know what's going on to pray for them. I would just say this, if you ever share something sensitive with your elder team, you should always tell your elder team or remind them that if they talk to this person about it, they should say Dylan shared with the elders, for example, for us.
Yeah,
so it's not like Dylan's just telling everybody my business. It's I'm an elder here. We were praying about it. We talked about it. I just want to see how you're doing. So just make sure that they know if they talk to somebody that they kind of give that caveat. He shared it with the elders, not just like anyone he just thought publicly. Was talking to.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Share names in specific situations. You've got to be able to do that. It's good for you so that you don't have to carry everything by yourself. And if you're like, I don't know that I can trust these people, well, that's a big thing. Yeah, I don't know that we've done an episode on our eldership process.
We'll look back. If not, then we should do we should do it soon because I think we have a pretty good process.
Yeah, when we tried to put one together, I was trying to find like what do we do, and there was a lot of churches that are established and bigger. I actually found their stuff online. It was just like a major process, which is fine. But as a smaller-ish, newer church, I was like, we don't need this 18-month.
Yeah.
But then a lot of stuff was like read a couple books, and so kind of with our own thing, and we, we'll edit as we go along. But it's like a six-ish month process. Not busy work because I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah.
But it's like it does reveal is this a good fit or not.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, share names in specific situations. And then lastly, number 7, just remember that it's not just a business meeting. You're not just there to make decisions for the church. You should, have relationships. Like you should like to be with each other.
Yeah. Like
I've told our elders, I know, especially the one that's on a Monday night, you got to come from work. I know it's a kind of a long day, but I hope it's the environment where it's like, yeah, I might be tired, but I'm glad that I was there. Especially by the time it was over, like this was worth my time.
Yeah.
it helps if you have an agenda and stick to it. So it helps to be worth their time. But one of the things that we do, especially in light of just, it feels like every 6 months, someone really well known in the Christian world, bad stuff comes out.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of minutes, towards the beginning where I'll share, just how I'm doing, and people can ask any questions that they want. We have dinner together too on the Monday night one, and so it's time to hang out. But leave space for talk about how you're doing, especially if you're the lead pastor. I would encourage you to lead the way. We did the Enneagram thing, which you may or may not be familiar with, and it's like there's 2 8s, a 3, and a 1.
Yep.
All that means is we don't have emotions, and especially if you're an 8 and a 3 too, you don't really like to be vulnerable, and so we want us to be able to be vulnerable with each other. I have to do that too, and so just having a space where you can do that, and space where you guys can just build a relationship and not just make decisions is really important.
Yeah, and building that as kind of the foundation of what it is really allows your team to potentially down the road call out issues that they see in you. Thankfully, we haven't had to do that here, but if there's an issue that we've seen where Dylan, specifically in our example as a pastor, was, I don't know, going down a road to a pretty serious moral failure or something like that, where we could see that this may be where something's headed, it gives us a lot more leeway to address it if it's something that we've been having conversations of in the past. Not about this specific issue, but just about being vulnerable and that we're not just here to talk about budgets. Where if that's all we were talking about budgets, then hopefully we would still point it out. But that doesn't, obviously that doesn't seem like the environment to do so if it's just treated like a business meeting. And so, be vulnerable with each other, be friends. I think you mentioned it in passing, but I think one of the biggest things that we do when we meet in person is eat together. Because that's when you can really talk about what's going on in the week and things that may not seem big enough to be an agenda item especially for not just Dylan, but for the team, but just what's going on. I mean, everybody knows that. Everything is shared most over food. And so share a meal with each other, be honest, be honest and vulnerable. You can't expect people to if you aren't. But that's also what's going to make people want to stay on the team. Not everyone wants to stay. People come from work. They don't want to come from work to go to something that feels like work. Enjoy spending time together and help them enjoy it as well.
Yeah. So again, having an agenda helps with this because it's when we say it's not a business meeting, it's not an excuse to just do whatever.
Yes.
But have scheduled time where we're just going to hang out together. But remember, it's not just a business meeting. You are leading a church, so it's not just like a board meeting for a normal business or nonprofit. There's some relational and spiritual components to that make this a little bit unique than a typical board that you might have at another organization.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are 7 tips for running an elder or leadership meeting. Hope that was helpful. Again, head to faithstreet.com/practical to get a focused app for discipleship and community. Check them out, faithstreet.com/practical. They'll answer all your questions. You get 20% off. And if you're new with us, listen to the podcast. If you're on Facebook, Practical Church Planning, we have a Facebook group. I think we've got about 950 people as of this recording now in there, sharing ideas and thoughts. And thanks for being with us. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.